Hi, I'm really excited to share this new story for you. In this one, I explore a really complicated family dynamics and a difficult choice that a character has to make. Let's listen.
My dad barked at my 7-year-old stepdaughter. "No one cares what you think." My mom added sweetly, "Only real grandchildren get to vote." She went silent. Then I stood up and said, "I need to make an announcement." 5 minutes later, the whole room was in shock. The second my father's voice cracked across the living room, every other sound in my parents' house seemed to fall through the floor. My 7-year-old stepdaughter, Clara, still had her hand half raised, like she thought maybe this was a misunderstanding somebody would fix if she just waited long enough. Then my mother leaned in with that soft, sugary tone she uses when she wants to make something ugly sound reasonable, and Clara's face changed. The other kids stopped rustling their little voting slips. My sister Mallory froze with a paper plate in her hand. My brother Graham actually set his soda down. I looked at my husband Evan, Clara's father, and saw the same shock on his face that I felt in my throat. But he didn't move, so I did. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and said, "I need to make an announcement." Dad made a small, irritated noise like I was interrupting his show. I slipped my hand into my tote, closed my fingers around the folder I'd been carrying all day, and watched the room shift from casual to uneasy in about 2 seconds. Half an hour earlier, everybody had been smiling. Now nobody wanted to guess what was in my hand. Earlier that afternoon, my parents' house had looked like one of their favorite productions. Folding chairs dragged in from the garage, a big bowl of pretzels on the coffee table, kids orbiting the living room and back deck like noisy little planets. My mother loves these gatherings because she gets to act like she's the keeper of family traditions. She was already talking about the next outing before half the burgers from this one were off the grill. "We need to pick something for the kids next month," she said, tapping a pen against a notepad. "Something special." My sister Mallory suggested the trampoline park. My brother Graham's wife mentioned the science museum because of the dinosaur exhibit. Dad threw in a small amusement park about 40 minutes away, and suddenly every child in the room had a platform and a position. The older boys started debating height requirements like lawyers. 2 of the girls wanted the museum because they'd seen a giant fossil online. Clara was on the rug between me and Evan, knees tucked under her, listening with that bright look she gets when she thinks she's about to be included in something fun. At that point, I still let myself believe the afternoon might stay ordinary. It took less than a minute for the kids to split into camps and defend their picks with the absolute confidence only children bring to trivial decisions. Mallory's son declared the trampoline park basically the Olympics. Graham's daughter insisted the museum had a fossil bigger than Dad's truck. Clara lit up at the words amusement park and scooted forward onto both knees like she'd been waiting all day to have something to champion. "They have the little coaster," she said, talking right over 2 cousins who were also talking, "and the teacups, and the water boats." She was animated, loud, a little bossy, and completely normal for a 7-year-old in a room full of excited cousins. One of the boys interrupted her. She interrupted him back. Clara sliced the air with both hands while she explained why the museum was mostly just looking and the amusement park was actual fun. I remember noticing how easy she looked in that moment. 3 years earlier, she had hovered at the edges of groups. She assumed she belonged there, exactly like the others. And then I saw my father's face and knew the afternoon had shifted on me. My father wasn't bothered by noise in general. He was only bothered by Clara's. That was what made it impossible to excuse. Graham's youngest kept tugging on Dad's sleeve and chanting "Trampoline Park" directly into his ear. Mallory's daughter whined so dramatically my mother laughed. But every time Clara jumped in, his mouth flattened into that tight line I had learned to dread. Once, when she leaned toward the coffee table to make another point, he said, "Let other people talk," even though 3 children were already talking over each other. A minute later, she laughed too loudly at one of her own jokes, and he turned his head with open irritation. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't new. My parents had spent the last 3 years enforcing the same silent rule every chance they got. Clara could visit. Clara could smile for pictures if someone remembered. Clara could sit at the table. But Clara was not supposed to forget that she was standing near the family, not inside it. I put my hand lightly on her shoulder when she moved closer to the adults. She didn't notice. Dad did. His eyes flicked from her to me, and I knew exactly what that meant. My mother, who loves turning simple things into ceremonies when the audience suits her, decided the argument needed structure. "All right," she said, lifting her notepad. "We're going to vote." The room cheered like she'd announced a game show. She tore little squares from the pad, passed them out one by one, and told the kids to write or draw their choice. Dad found crayons in the junk drawer and tossed them onto the rug. Suddenly, the whole debate got even louder. Kids were comparing handwriting, asking how to spell museum, and peeking at each other's papers. Clara grinned and reached her hand out with the rest of them. Mom handed a slip to Mallory's youngest, then Graham's daughter, then 2 more cousins, then the oldest boy who didn't even want one. Clara kept her hand up, patient at first. When Mom turned away, Clara looked at me and gave the little half-laugh kids give when adults forget them. She leaned forward and said, "I need one too." My mother's fingers paused on the last scrap of paper. She looked straight at Clara's hand, then folded that scrap in half and laid it beside Dad instead. That was when I stopped telling myself it might be accidental. Clara still didn't understand what was happening. She was excited, not cautious, and excitement makes children persistent. "I want the rides," she said, bouncing once on her knees as the cousins started scribbling. "And the bumper cars." Dad kept counting papers like he hadn't heard her. Clara leaned closer, trying again, because every other child in the room had been encouraged to do exactly that for the last 10 minutes. "Can I just say mine? Mine is the amusement park." Dad's head snapped up so fast the room seemed to flinch with him. "No one cares what you think," he said, loud enough that even the kids on the back deck turned and looked in. Clara froze. Before I could speak, my mother stepped in with that terrible, calm voice she uses when she wants cruelty to sound like manners. "Honey," she said to Clara, "only real grandchildren get to vote." She even smiled a little, as if she were explaining where the cups were kept. Every child in that room heard the sentence. Mallory looked at me across the coffee table with disbelief all over her face. Graham muttered, "Mom," under his breath. Clara's mouth opened, then shut. The room went quiet the way rooms do when something ugly has finally been said out loud. The worst part wasn't the sentence itself. It was the way it landed in Clara's face. She went still all at once, like somebody had turned a key inside her and shut off the bright, noisy child who had been arguing about bumper cars 10 seconds earlier. She tucked her hands into her lap and fixed on one loose carpet thread, as if that was safer than looking at anyone. I turned to my husband, Evan, Clara's father, because some part of me still expected him to step between his daughter and the people who had just ranked her in public. He looked wrecked. He also looked frozen. Evan has spent years trying not to turn every visit with my parents into a war, and in that second the old instinct won before his voice did. So I stood up. My chair legs scraped against the hardwood, and every adult in the room looked at me. "I need to make an announcement," I said. Dad gave me an irritated, "Alyssa, sit down." I reached into my tote anyway, wrapped my fingers around the folder I'd carried in from the car, and pulled it halfway out. That was the moment the room stopped treating me like the problem and started wondering what I knew. Three years earlier, I met Evan because I taught a Saturday creative movement class for little kids at a rec center with mirrored walls and a floor that always smelled faintly like lemon cleaner. Most of the children came in already bouncing. Clara didn't. She was 4 then, small for her age, with a pink leotard that kept slipping off one shoulder and a face so solemn it made the other children look even louder by comparison. During our first class together, the kids were supposed to pretend they were butterflies crossing the room. Clara stood near the wall and watched everybody else flap. Her father, Evan, hovered by the door with the tired, apologetic posture of someone waiting for a problem before it even happened. After class, he bent to help her with her shoes, and I heard another parent ask where Clara's mom was. He answered softly, "She died in March." It wasn't dramatic. It was worse than dramatic because it sounded rehearsed. The next week, Clara came back and still didn't join the circle until I handed her one of the silk scarves we used for movement games and asked if she wanted to help me lead. She took the scarf first, then my hand. That was the first opening. Evan and I did not rush anything. For months, our relationship lived in the edges of Saturday mornings. A few extra minutes after class, conversations in the parking lot, Clara showing me a sticker on her shirt while he folded her sweater and tried to remember what normal conversations sounded like. She bonded with me first because children tell the truth with their feet, and Clara kept choosing to stand next to mine. She asked if I would hold her water bottle while she spun. She saved me half a packet of crackers one morning because teachers need snacks too. Eventually, Evan and I started meeting for coffee after class, but only when Clara was with his sister or asleep during a nap window. He never acted like I was there to fix his life, and I never treated Clara like a bridge to him. Over time, our routines got real. I knew which stuffed rabbit belonged in the car for long rides. I knew she hated the seam in one pair of socks and loved bedtime stories read slowly. She still remembered her mother. We kept that true. But by the time Evan and I admitted we were in love, Clara had already started running to the door when I came over saying, "Alyssa's here." Clara built the bond before we named the family. My parents reacted badly the minute they understood Evan was not a phase. I told them over Sunday roast at their kitchen table, thinking adult news deserved an adult conversation. My mother put her fork down first. "A widower with a child?" she said, like she'd discovered I was considering a merger, not a marriage. Dad didn't bother softening anything. "So, you're planning to spend your best years raising someone else's kid?" he asked. I said her name was Clara and that she was 4, funny, cautious, and obsessed with songs about frogs. Mom waved the details away. "Men like that don't really move on," she said. "They compare, and children that age get attached to whoever is convenient." Dad added, "You don't need to sign up for baggage when you can just start clean." I remember staring at the potatoes because if I looked directly at either of them, I was going to end the night early. I told them Clara was not baggage. I told them Evan wasn't shopping for a replacement woman. I told them this was serious. Mom sighed and said, "We'll see how permanent it is." That sentence sat in the room like a stain. It was the first time I heard my own parents talk about a little girl as if she were temporary inventory. I married Evan anyway, and I did it because what we had was solid, not because I thought marriage would force my parents to become better people. Still, I hoped my larger family might do what large families sometimes do and absorb us by sheer repetition. At our backyard wedding, my sister Mallory knelt in the grass to fix Clara's flower crown, while my brother Graham taught her how to toss petals higher. The cousins pulled her into the sprinkler that same summer without a second thought. For a while, that helped me pretend the problem was smaller than it was. Then came the little moments my parents made sure I noticed. My mother ordered matching holiday pajamas for all the grandkids, and somehow Clara's size was missing. Dad lined the children up for a photo at Thanksgiving and said, "Let the real grandkids up front," as if he were sorting chairs, not people. Mallory shot him a look so sharp he actually cleared his throat, but he didn't take the words back. I kept bringing Clara because the cousins loved her, and because I told myself exposure might wear my parents down. Instead, they got more practiced at drawing the same line in different ways. They had learned how to exclude her politely. Even with all of that, Evan and I kept showing up for my parents in ways that were concrete, useful, and frankly undeserved. My mother's hours had been cut at work, and my father's retirement money never stretched as far as his pride. So on the first of every month, we sent money from our joint account to help with groceries, utilities, and whatever surprise bill had landed that week. When a leak from their upstairs bathroom came through the downstairs ceiling, Evan spent a Saturday fixing it instead of at the park with Clara. He replaced 2 porch steps, fixed a garbage disposal, and once drove over after work just to tarp a section of roof before a storm. My parents accepted every bit of it with amazing ease. Dad would clap Evan on the back and say, "Appreciate the help," in the same tone he'd use with a neighbor lending a ladder. Mom texted me things like, "Can you do the transfer a little early this month?" without ever once saying Clara's name in the same message as a holiday invite. We were a household, but my parents had no trouble taking support from the family they still refused to fully recognize. By the time Clara turned 7, the truth of our family no longer needed anyone's permission, and that was exactly why we had started the adoption process. Because Clara's mother had died when Clara was little and Evan had sole parental rights, the legal part was mostly paperwork, waiting, and careful steps, not a fight. Still, it mattered. It meant the world matching what daily life had already been for years. A week before the gathering, Clara sat at our kitchen island drawing hearts on scrap paper while I filled out a packet from our attorney. She looked up and asked, "When it's done, will it all say the same thing everywhere?" I told her yes. She said, "Good," and went back to coloring like we were discussing lunch. That morning, before we went to my parents' house, Evan and I had stopped at the bank to notarize 2 more signatures. The folder was still in my tote beside my wallet, 2 pens, and Clara's hair ties. We were supposed to mail copies on Monday, and I hadn't taken it back out after the bank. On the drive there, Clara fell asleep in the back seat with one sneaker half off. So when my parents made their big mistake, the papers were still with me. When I pulled the folder the rest of the way out in my parents' living room, the papers made a dry snapping sound that somehow carried more than yelling would have. Dad folded his arms. Mom gave a little laugh like she still expected to smooth me down. I laid the packet flat on the coffee table between the pretzel bowl and the children's crayons. "These are Clara's adoption papers," I said. No one interrupted me then. "Evan and I are already in the process. Clara is not a guest in my life. She is becoming my daughter in every legal way, too." I didn't wave the documents around. The signature lines were visible. The notary stamp was visible. My sister Mallory quietly took the slips of paper away from the younger kids and steered them toward the kitchen. Graham stood beside the doorway like he was ready to stop anybody from doing something stupid. Dad looked from the papers to Evan and back to me as if one of us would admit this was a stunt. Evan was pale, but he moved to Clara's side and rested a hand on her shoulder. The room had spent years pretending our family was vague. I wanted them to see it in black ink. My father recovered first because anger is his favorite shelter. "Don't be ridiculous," he said. "Nobody said she couldn't come around." My mother jumped in right behind him. "Alyssa, you're blowing up the entire family over a misunderstanding." I looked straight at both of them. "No," I said. "You blew this up when you told my child, in front of every other child here, that she doesn't count." Dad opened his mouth, probably to argue biology, so I cut him off. "Listen carefully. If Clara is not accepted as family, then you do not get me either. You do not get access to my house, my time, my energy, or my silence." Mom did the offended blink she uses when consequences arrive faster than she planned. "She's Evan's daughter," she said. "You know what I mean." "She's mine," I said. It was the first clean public time I had ever said it to them that way. Dad tried again. "So that's it? You're choosing her over your own parents?" I didn't raise my voice. "I will choose my daughter every single time." In that room, in front of everybody, I chose my daughter and let them hear it. After that, the silence was so complete I could hear one of the kids in the kitchen asking Mallory for more lemonade. Nobody came charging after me with arguments. Nobody apologized either. My parents had spent years depending on confusion to protect them, and plain language had taken that away. I bent down, took Clara's small hand in one of mine and the folder in the other, and told her, "We're going home." Evan moved then, finally and fully. He grabbed our family bag, Clara's cardigan from the back of a chair, and the half-finished plate she'd been too hurt to touch again. His face was tight with guilt, but he didn't hesitate. Mallory met my eyes and gave one short nod. Graham stepped forward and held the front door open before Dad could get there first. My father tried once. "If you walk out over this," he began. I didn't wait to hear the end of the sentence. Outside, the air smelled like cut grass and charcoal. Clara climbed into the back seat without asking questions. I got into the passenger seat. Evan shut Clara's door gently, then mine. The front door closed behind us with a solid thud, and that sound felt honest. We didn't go straight home. Clara had folded inward in that quiet, careful way she uses when she's trying not to need anything, and I knew our house would feel too silent if we walked into it cold. So Evan pulled into a little ice cream place on the edge of town with plastic picnic tables and a giant fiberglass cone out front. We sat in the car first because Clara wasn't ready to go inside. She stared at the menu board and asked the question I had been dreading since the living room. "Am I not a real grandchild?" Her voice was flat, not dramatic. I turned in my seat and answered before anyone could wrap it in adult wording. "You are my daughter," I said. "And you are part of this family. What they said was wrong." Evan leaned back against the headrest for a second before speaking. "I should have said something sooner," he told her. "I am sorry." Clara nodded once but kept looking at me, which told me where the wound had landed. "Nobody gets to decide whether you belong," I said. "Not grandparents. Not anybody." She was quiet for another beat, then asked if she could get chocolate with sprinkles. That was enough to get us out of the car. That night, after Clara was asleep with her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, Evan and I sat at the kitchen island with the light on and the house dark. There are moments when hurt can still be argued with if nobody does anything practical. I did not want that. So I opened our banking app, pulled up the recurring transfer that went to my parents on the first of every month, and turned my phone toward Evan. It covered groceries, part of the electric bill, and the endless, just until next month emergencies my mother texted me about. "Are we really done?" I asked, because I wanted the answer to belong to both of us. Evan looked at the screen, then at the repair estimate for materials he'd promised to buy for Dad's deck. "Yes," he said. He entered the verification code when the bank sent it, and I hit cancel. Then I opened the family group chat with everyone in it and typed one factual message. "After what was said to Clara today, we will not attend events involving Mom and Dad unless Clara is treated the same as every other child. We are also stepping back from providing financial help. No speech, no insults, just terms." For the first time, the boundary existed somewhere they couldn't talk over. My parents treated the group message like a tantrum they could outwait, but my siblings did something my parents had not expected. They called me separately and spoke plainly. Mallory rang first after she got her kids to bed. "My kids heard everything," she said. "One of them asked why Clara didn't get paper if she's family. I didn't have a good answer, because there isn't one." She sounded tired of excusing them. An hour later, Graham called from his garage so his son wouldn't overhear. "Dad's been doing this for a while," he said. "Today he just stopped hiding it." Neither of them asked me to smooth things over. By the next afternoon, the three of us were on speakerphone, talking through the next kid's outing that had supposedly started the mess in the first place. Mallory said, "The cousins still want to go somewhere together. The grandparents do not need to be part of that plan." Graham agreed immediately. We decided the outing would go forward without my parents, and every child would be included, Clara most obviously of all. By noon the next day, the invitation list had changed. My parents were no longer included. We also agreed the original vote no longer counted. If the outing was still happening, every child would get the same say in it this time. They showed up at our house 2 evenings later without calling first, exactly the kind of move people make when they are used to treating access like a birthright. I saw my parents through the front window before I opened the door, Dad rigid with anger, Mom wearing hurt like a prop. Clara was in the den building a blanket fort, so I stepped outside and pulled the door mostly shut behind me. Dad didn't waste time. "You cut off the transfer?" he demanded. Mom jumped in next. "And now your brother and sister are freezing us out of the children's outing like we've done something monstrous." I folded my arms and stayed on the porch. Dad kept going. The deck boards still needed replacing. The water bill was due. They had counted on that money. They had counted on Evan coming by Sunday with tools. Underneath all of it was the real complaint. They had counted on me being too trained to make a consequence stick. "You sabotaged our role as grandparents over one sentence," Mom said. "No," I told her. "You sabotaged it when you decided Clara could be present but not equal." Dad took one step closer, and Evan opened the door behind me. For the first time, they were hearing the sound of something being taken away. My mother tried a different angle when outrage didn't work. She softened her face and said, "Alyssa, we included her. She was invited, wasn't she?" I stared at her for a second because the sentence was so revealing, it almost saved me the trouble of responding. "Being tolerated is not the same as being loved," I said, "and it's not the same as being family." Dad scoffed. "You're acting like we harmed her because we were honest." "No," I said. "You harmed her because you humiliated a 7-year-old in front of a room full of children and called it honesty." Mom crossed her arms. "She isn't blood." There it was again, the sentence they kept wanting to polish into a principle. Then hear mine, I told them. Clara doesn't need your permission to stand in a room. She needs the exact same treatment every other child gets. Same welcome, same vote, same care. Nothing less. That was the only standard. Evan stepped fully onto the porch then, shoulder to shoulder with me. You will not speak about Clara like that here again, he said, low and steady. My parents left angry, but the anger looked thinner now. Even they could hear how small it sounded. A few days later, Mallory, Graham, Evan, and I sat around my dining table with coffee, calendars, and the sort of practical tone families use when they are done pretending confusion is innocence. The kids played in the backyard while we figured out how to keep the cousins connected without giving my parents another stage. Mallory said what everyone had been circling. Mom and Dad are teaching the kids that some people get treated better because of labels, she said. I'm not doing that. Graham nodded and pulled up the museum website on his phone. We decided to let the kids vote again in a cousins family thread, properly this time, with the younger ones using our phones. Mallory's oldest typed out the 3 options. Graham's son sent 3 voice notes campaigning for the trampoline park. Clara sat beside me on the banquette and watched the messages come in with wary eyes. Can I say mine too? She asked so quietly I almost missed it. Yes, I said immediately. Exactly once. Just like everybody else. She looked at my phone, then recorded a tiny voice note that said, I still pick the amusement park. The first one was barely audible. Her cousin asked her to repeat it. The second time, she spoke up. The museum won, and nobody acted like her vote had been a favor. She had won because she belonged. The museum outing itself was almost boring in the best possible way, which is what safety usually looks like once you've had enough chaos. Clara held hands with her cousins under the giant suspended whale skeleton, argued about which fossil had the biggest teeth, and pressed the button at the weather station. At lunch, Graham's son passed her the chips before taking any for himself. Mallory's girls asked Clara to sit between them for the planetarium show. Twice I caught Clara checking my face before she answered a question, and both times I nodded before she spoke. By the gift shop, she was choosing postcards for herself and one for Evan without that pause. Later that evening, after we got home, and while Clara was inside showing Evan the museum map she had brought back, my parents appeared on the porch again. This time Mom held a gift bag with a stuffed dinosaur inside. We may have handled things badly, she said stiffly. Dad added, Let's not drag this out. I didn't take the bag. Trying is better than nothing, I said. But one gift doesn't buy immediate access back into Clara's life. Trust gets rebuilt slowly, and only if it's real. Dad's jaw tightened. Now Mallory and Graham are keeping the other grandkids from us too. That decision belongs to them, not me, I said. A gift bag was not a bridge. 6 months later, the adoption was final. We took Clara to the courthouse in a navy dress she had picked herself because it made her look official, and the judge smiled when she answered every question with complete seriousness. Afterward, we met Mallory, Graham, their spouses, and all the cousins at a pizza place with long tables and bad acoustics, and Clara kept writing out her full name on 3 paper placemats just because she could. The family that chose her showed up clearly once everyone stopped pretending choice had nothing to do with family. My parents survived without our monthly transfers. They figured out the deck. They paid their own bills. They also learned that centrality is not a permanent job title. We keep them on low contact now. They see us only in limited settings, never unplanned, and never without the standard being obvious. They are more careful, which is not the same as changed, but it is honest. I have not promised them reconciliation. I have left a narrow door open if their effort ever becomes consistent enough to deserve trust. Until then, distance is protection. Last weekend, the cousins started planning an outing over pizza, and Clara raised her hand before anyone else. These days, nobody in my house has to ask whether her vote counts. It does. So tell me, did I do the right thing by standing up for her in front of everyone? And am I doing the right thing by keeping the door open just a little in case they truly change one day?
Hi, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought about the story. Also, I have started narrating my own stories in character. I'm posting them on my other channel, so please check this out.